Captain America: Brave New World is not gonna save Marvel. The movie could be great or terrible. Either way, the MCU is still in a lot of trouble. In this video, we're gonna go over the 5 main reasons why the MCU has been struggling. We'll compare the current MCU to its once consistent greatness, and then after that, we're gonna come up with a plan on how it can all be fixed before it's too late. So, let's begin with point 1. Also, quick thank you to today's sponsor Squarespace, but more on that later. It's really easy to look at the MCU post-Endgame and say the reason it's struggling is because of bad storytelling. Lots of Marvel movies and shows recently have had terrible storytelling, don't get me wrong, but let's not glorify every movie from the Infinity Saga. The Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor: The Dark World, and Captain Marvel all exist. The MCU also had a lot of mid-movies too. Is anyone gonna sit here and say Doctor Strange was a good movie? No. In the Multiverse Saga, there have also been great stories. Shang-Chi, Spider-Man No Way Home, Black Panther 2, Guardians 3, Loki, these are great stories. So the issues from the Multiverse Saga stem from an issue far greater than storytelling. What did the Infinity Saga have that the Multiverse Saga doesn't have? When we look back at the first 3 phases of the MCU, of course we know who the main players were. Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor were the main characters. And then there were the supporting characters like Black Widow, the Hulk, and Hawkeye. Yeah, these characters were great, some more than others, but what made these characters great were not 1 or 2 movies. It was the arcs that persisted over the course of 5, 6, or 7 movies. What made the MCU great was not individual movies. Some were great, but let's be real, most of them weren't. What made the Infinity Saga so great was the fact that serialized storytelling was brought to the big screen. When you watch a TV show, do you expect every storyline and character arc to be resolved in the first episode? No. You tune in because you know over the course of a season or multiple seasons, you will see these long stories play out in a hopefully satisfying way. The MCU brought that to the big screen. When you watched Captain America: The Winter Soldier for the first time, you didn't expect that movie to be the end of Steve Rogers' story. You knew this was a chapter in a much wider story, a story that played out over the course of 7 movies. When you look at just the first 6 movies of the MCU, aka Phase 1, excluding post-credit scenes, Tony Stark was in 3 movies, and the rest of the 5 main Avengers were in 2 movies each. And if we expand this to the first 2 phases of the MCU, aka the first 12 movies, Tony Stark was in 5 movies, Steve Rogers, Thor, and Natasha were in 4 movies each, and Bruce Banner and Clint Barton were in 3 movies each. Over the course of these movies, these characters grew and changed. You were invested in these stories. By the time Tony Stark died in Endgame, he had an active role in 9 movies. Serialized storytelling is what made the MCU great. Now, let's compare the first 2 phases of the Infinity Saga to the first 2 phases of the Multiverse Saga. Phases 1 and 2 had 12 movies combined. Phases 4 and 5 have 13 movies and 12 shows combined. This doesn't include the animated shows or the short films. Of these 25 projects, only 1 character will have played a prominent role in 3 of them or more, and that's Yelena. She was in Black Widow, Hawkeye, and will be in Thunderbolts. Tony Stark was in 9 of the first 22 movies. Yelena, the most prominent character in the Multiverse Saga, will be in 3 of the first 23 projects of this saga. There's no serialized storytelling here. No characters to get invested in the long term. Now, there are some examples of stories connecting. Black Widow tied into the Hawkeye show, WandaVision tied into Doctor Strange, Miss Marvel tied into The Marvels, and Black Panther 2 is going to tie into the Ironheart show. This is the richest example of serialized storytelling we've gotten so far. In the first 3 phases, even movies that didn't particularly develop a character still served a purpose in the wider MCU. Thor: The Dark World was a bad movie, but at least it introduced one of the Infinity Stones. Every movie had a place in the MCU. Shang-Chi came out 4 years ago. Will he ever be brought back? Will the mystery of the 10 Rings ever be relevant again? What about Moon Knight? Is there anything important here? Will he show up again? There's just a lot of stories stories here that don't serve any wider purpose other than telling its own story. So reason number one why the MCU is struggling? No serialized storytelling. Now, as we've discussed, there are a few examples of serialized storytelling. Clearly, Kang was supposed to be a big part of the MCU, but Jonathan Majors got into trouble, so they scrapped the entirety of that. But even if we ignore that and look at everything else, almost every attempt at serialized storytelling has not been followed through on in any way. You know what the Infinity Saga was really good at? Keeping promises. The post-credit scenes became a staple of the MCU. Almost everyone knew that when the credits started to roll, you had to stick around for the post-credit scenes. Sometimes it was just one scene, sometimes it was two. Sometimes these scenes were teases for what's to come, and sometimes they were just fun, goofy scenes. In the 23 Infinity Saga movies, I counted 12 post-credit scenes that were teasing something, so this doesn't include the fun scenes. Of those 21 post-credit scenes, 20 of them actually paid off in some way. These teases came in a variety of different shapes and sizes. Sometimes it was literally just showing scenes from the next movie or simply teasing it. Sometimes it was showing characters that would appear in future movies. Sometimes they just wanted to tease plot lines that would be relevant in the future. Iron Man 2 ended with showing Thor's hammer. The next movie was Thor. The Avengers and Age of Ultron just showed Thanos. Thanos was the big bad of this entire saga. Infinity War, Ant-Man and the Wasp, and Captain Marvel all had post-credit scenes that were paid off in Endgame. The only post-credit scene that didn't amount to anything was one of the scenes in Spider-Man Homecoming. This went nowhere, but every other post-credit scene, promises were made and they were kept. Let's take a look at just Phase 4. Phase 5 isn't even done yet, so we'll hold off from making judgments there. There were 14 projects in Phase 4. Let's count again how many post-credit scenes paid off in any way. Again, I'm only going to focus on the teases, not the fun scenes. Black Widow, it showed Yelena wanting to get revenge. This paid off in the Hawkeye show. 1 out of 1, good start. Shang-Chi set up some questions about how the 10 rings were made. This came out 4 years ago with no follow-up. 1 out of 2. Zhao Ling took over the 10 rings 4 years later and no follow-up. 1 out of 3. The Eternals met Harry Styles. It appears the Eternals will never show up again, so this didn't pay off. 1 out of 4. I think this scene with Jon Snow is supposed to set up the Blade movie, but no follow-up yet. 1 out of 5. Doctor Strange met Charlize Theron, a character who has yet to show up again. 1 out of 6. Thor Love and Thunder teased Hercules, a character that has not showed up again. 1 out of 7. WandaVision teased the events of Multiverse of Madness. This counts. 2 out of 8. Falcon and the Winter Soldier had a scene with Sharon Carter. This hasn't paid off. 2 out of 9. Loki set up season 2, and season 2 happened, so we'll count it. 3 out of 10. Moon Knight has gone nowhere. 3 out of 11. Miss Marvel tied directly into the Marvels. This counts. 4 out of 12. She-Hulk teased the return of the Abomination, which hasn't paid off. 4 out of 13. So Phase 4 had less than a third of its teases paying off. Why should fans of Marvel be excited for the future when none of these promises are being kept? And Phase 5 has only continued this trend so far. Reason number 2, the MCU is struggling. Promises are not being kept. Now, let's say hypothetically promises were being kept. Most of, if not all of these post-credit scenes were being followed through on. There's still a big issue. A handful of these projects, especially the movies, are narrative dead ends. The first movie in Phase 4 was Black Widow. Black Widow died a few movies beforehand, so they devoted their first movie to a character that had already been dead. There's not much more you can do with her. You could argue that this was all just set up for Yelena. Okay, they haven't done much with her since. We'll see how Thunderbolts goes, I suppose. Eternals is a movie that is not getting a sequel. It made headlines for being the first MCU movie with a negative rating. The writers couldn't continue this story even if they wanted to. So this is a dead end. The most profitable MCU movie since Endgame was Spider-Man No Way Home. That movie killed it at the box office, but the movie itself was a reset for the character of Peter Parker. When the movie ends, no one knows who he is anymore. Spider-Man 4 is happening, but it seems like Sony is going to keep Spider-Man for themselves again. So there's no storyline for Marvel to continue here either. The movie was great, but it's a dead end. Black Panther 2 was a bit of a peculiar one. I'm not sure if Shuri is supposed to be the future of Black Panther or not, so it's not technically a dead end, but other writers can continue the story until they're told what they can do. Ant-Man 3 was supposed to be a big movie for Marvel. Quantumania was going to be the first Ant-Man movie with real stakes. It was going to tie into Kang the Conqueror, the main villain of this era of the MCU. How did this turn out? The movie bombed. It made even less money than the previous two Ant-Man movies. Kang is also gone, as we mentioned earlier, so the future of Scott Lang is bleak, and what was set up here is not going to be continued. This movie turned out to be a dead end. The biggest example of these dead end movies is Guardians 3. The movie was fantastic, and it was a big win for Marvel, but the movie was a resolution to all the characters of the Guardians of the Galaxy. This movie was James Gunn's big farewell before he went to DC. This movie, while great, can't lead to anything. Peter Quill might come back, but I don't see any of the other Guardians ever returning. So this movie from the start was a dead end. This is why the future of the MCU is so bleak right now, even though there have been a handful of great stories. Not all movies are created equal. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania was way more important to the future of Marvel than Guardians 3 was. It reminds me of the current state of Star Wars. People know Andor is excellent, but they are still bleak about the future of the franchise. Andor is a dead end though. Once season 2 comes out, that's it. Andor's over. Ahsoka and The Mandalorian are the open-ended shows, and the recent seasons there disappointed heavily. The Marvels is a movie that's setting up the rest of the MCU, and the movie was the biggest blockbuster failure in the history of the MCU. So what is there to get excited about in the future, other than knowing that Robert Downey Jr. is coming back? A move that reeks of desperation. The only thing people are excited about in the future have nothing to do with the current storylines. People are excited about Fantastic Four because it's the first Fantastic Four movie in a decade. People are looking forward to the Blade movie because they like the original Blade movies. There's nothing set up from the current MCU storyline that people are excited for, except for maybe the Thunderbolts, because that looks kind of fun. The peak of the MCU back in the day had no dead ends. Every movie mattered. People were thrilled to see the next movie. Captain Marvel, a movie that was ass, reached $1 billion at the box office just cause it was gonna tie into Endgame. Reason number 3 the MCU is struggling: too many dead ends. I've spoken about the movies a lot more than the Disney Plus shows so far, and rightfully so. The movies are way more important. If you watched my video last month where I discussed the Star Wars shows on Disney Plus, you would know I think the platform is pathetic. The way they create shows on this platform are an embarrassment to television, and Marvel's even worse at this. The reason I hate these shows so much, even when they're actually decent, is because these shows could have just been movies instead. I have yet to see one of these 6-episode shows that have really wowed me, and it's because these aren't shows, they're long movies split into 6 parts. People just don't enjoy that as much. WandaVision actually felt like a TV show, and technically so did She-Hulk, except She-Hulk was not good at all. These shows have done so much damage to the Marvel brand. For one, none of them have been great, and almost all of them have poor rewatchability. You don't hear people saying they want to rewatch Falcon and the Winter Soldier, even with the new Captain America movie coming out. When Phase 5 completes, they will have done 12 live-action shows on Disney Plus, and only one of them got a second season. That's embarrassing. It feels like many of these shows exist just to exist. Disney has this streaming service and they have to put content on it. They've completely lost what made the MCU so great. I loved how people pointed out the inconsistency of Nick Fury's character. He was really dark and serious in Secret Invasion, and then a few months later in The Marvels, he's basically a comic relief character. These shows don't feel like they matter. The direction of the Disney Plus shows should have been exactly like the Defender shows. Have there be 4 or 5 superheroes, give them their own shows, eventually they have a team-up show, and once that's all done, they all show up in the Avengers. This way, the shows stay relatively self-contained to Disney Plus. But instead, half these shows have just become pre-required viewing. You need to watch WandaVision in order to understand Multiverse of Madness. You need to watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier if you want to understand both Brave New World and Thunderbolts. If you want to understand the Marvels, you need to have watched Miss Marvel. Viewers hate pre-required viewing. You know what was probably the best Marvel show on Disney Plus? It wasn't any of the MCU shows. It was X-Men 97. Reason number 4 the MCU is struggling: it relied too much on Disney Plus. The last point is really simple. Recently, they've been relying too much on nostalgia. What's peculiar is that they're preying on people's nostalgia for stories that aren't even in the MCU. Spider-Man No Way Home relied on nostalgia for the Sony movies. Multiverse of Madness relied on some nostalgia for the X-Men movies that people didn't really like anyway. And now Deadpool and Wolverine relied on Wolverine and nostalgia for Marvel characters that had their own random movies. They're running out of things to nostalgia bait over. When it comes to characters in the MCU, the the only ones they can nostalgia bait over are Tony, Steve, and Natasha. And they're already bringing back Robert Downey Jr., so reason number 5 for why the MCU is struggling, relying too much on nostalgia. Now that we know the 5 main reasons why the MCU is failing, how can we fix this? Well, this is a bit tricky. So the first thing I would do is delay the Avengers movies. I don't care that Robert Downey Jr. is coming back. I don't care that the Russo brothers are directing it. The Multiverse Saga is not ready for an Avengers film. Those films were movies that were the culmination of storylines and characters we loved. This era of the MCU has neither, so we gotta delay the Avengers movies. The next thing I would do is develop a core group of Avengers. I was looking at the movies of these past 2 phases, and I just realized something. If you took the main characters of these 13 films, do you know how many of them have interacted with each other in any way? 3 is the answer. Peter Parker, Doctor Strange, and Peter Quill. Black Widow's dead, so she doesn't count. I'm not counting quick fan service scenes like the time Captain Marvel said hi to Peter and Sam Wilson fought Peter for like 3 minutes. I'm not counting that either. I actually forgot to include Ant-Man and the Falcon because these 2 interacted 10 years ago in 2015, and since then we've had 1 scene between them. My point is that none of these characters have any relationship with each other. If Avengers 5 was going to be a more foundational Avengers movie where these characters get to know each other, I could get behind that. But from the looks of it, these next 2 Avengers films will be a 2-parter, resulting in the end of an era. That's a lot to cram in. So in order to fix the MCU, you need to develop these characters. Take Shang-Chi, Doctor Strange, Shuri, and Captain America and make them the focus of the MCU. This could be in solo movies or in team-up movies. They just need to develop these characters. I also want to develop the Thunderbolts and the Fantastic Four even more than what they plan on doing. These movies haven't even come out yet, so it may be too soon to say, but at worst, these movies look interesting. Make Mr. Fantastic the face of the Avengers and build around him too. Phase 6 should be 6 movies. The Fantastic Four movie, which is already coming out, 1 movie devoted to each of these Avengers I just spoke about, and then an Avengers movie. If you really want to include Spider-Man, then make Spider-Man 4 a part of this phase 2. Focus on these characters and don't give any other random ass character a movie. The next thing Marvel should do is a total rehaul of the Disney Plus shows. Honestly, I would probably scrap them all and just continue on with Daredevil. Disney Plus has been such a failure that they all need to go. But if that's not an option, I would do a 2nd season of a few shows. Hawkeye with Kate Bishop, Miss Marvel, and Daredevil. Let Kate and Kamala develop the young Avengers on the small screen, and Daredevil can do all the badass shit. So, that's how I would revamp the Disney Plus shows. But before we wrap up, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform for anyone who wants to stand out online or start a business. Whether you're a content creator like me, or someone who wishes to start their own movie blog, Squarespace is perfect for you. If you sign up today, you can poke around and explore Squarespace 7.1 and see what it's capable of. You can use its new Design Intelligence AI to create any type of online presence, and it will have its own cool and unique identity. Use it to build a beautiful page that will capture your audience in a way only you can. If you're looking to build your own store because you're passionate about a product you wish to sell, or you have a wonderful idea, you can use Squarespace Payments to manage all your earnings in one place. You can set a variety of different prices, tiers, paywalls, all of that. Pretty much anything that will give your customers their best value. If you're a YouTuber like me and you wish to upload special behind the scenes videos or extended videos, you can do that as well. Frankly, Squarespace is the perfect place for any creator wishing to expand their brand. Head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/thegoldman to save 10% off your first purchase of website or domain. Again, that's squarespace.com/thegoldman to save 10% off your first purchase. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. So, what do you think about the current state of Marvel? Can Captain America Brave New World save it? Let me know down below. Tune in next week where we'll take a look at the entire Daredevil series. Stay tuned for that. Thank you everyone so much for watching another one of my videos. Don't forget to hit the Claude Squad, and I'll see you guys next time.